Welcome to CuddleTails, your favourite channel for magical adventures and children's stories. Remember to like, share and subscribe to support our channel. Now get comfy, snuggle up and get ready for today's Cuddle Tale. The sky above Bucharest darkened as heavy storm clouds gathered, rolling across the horizon like a creeping shadow. The once bustling streets grew quieter, people hurrying to take cover as the first raindrops fell, fat and cold. The air was thick with electricity, the tension almost palpable. Cookie and Biscuit huddled beneath a narrow shop awning, their fur already damp from the initial bursts of rain. They exchanged glances as a low rumble of thunder rolled in, vibrating through the ground beneath their paws. "That's not good," Biscuit muttered, her ears twitching as the storm began to escalate. The pounding of the rain grew louder, drops quickly transforming into sheets of water that cascaded off the edges of rooftops, turning the cobblestone streets into a maze of miniature rivers. Cookie watched the growing chaos, her amber eyes wide with both fascination and concern. "It's coming down hard," she said, her tail flicking nervously. She took a cautious step forward, only to see the water begin to rise along the edges of the street, swirling and churning as it mixed with the loose leaves and bits of discarded paper. "We need to find somewhere safer, Biscuit." Biscuit nodded, her expression calm despite the increasingly frantic storm. "The cafe cellar," she suggested, her voice steady. "It's always dry in there, and it's not far from here." Her whiskers twitched as another crack of thunder split the air, this one closer, sharper, making Cookie flinch. "Right, let's go before it gets any worse," Cookie agreed. She stepped out from under the awning, the rain immediately soaking through her thick, tabby fur, flattening it against her sides. Biscuit followed, her movements more deliberate, her paws skimming over the rapidly forming puddles. Together, they ventured out into the storm, the world around them transforming into a blur of grey and silver as the downpour intensified. The streets were almost empty now, save for a few brave or foolish souls still scrambling for shelter. Cookie led the way, her eyes darting from side to side, scanning for any sudden movements or obstacles. The water rushed along the edges of the road, pulling at her paws as they splashed through the overflowing gutters. Biscuit followed closely, her ears pinned back against the rain, her senses heightened by the unpredictability of their surroundings. A gust of wind swept through the street, sending a plastic bag skittering across their path. Cookie jumped back, her claws unsheathing instinctively. Biscuit, more composed, nudged her forward gently. "Stay focused, Cookie. We'll be fine as long as we keep moving." The storm roared on, the wind howling between the narrow alleys, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and fear. Every corner they turned presented new challenges. Rushing water, debris strewn across their path, and the ever-present danger of something unseen lurking in the shadows. But Biscuit and Cookie moved with purpose, their partnership steadying them against the chaos around. The cafe was only a few blocks away, but with the rising waters and unpredictable winds, it felt much farther. Biscuit's calm presence was a steadying force, her emerald eyes focused on the road ahead, while Cookie's quick reflexes kept them from stumbling over the hidden hazards underfoot. Together, they pushed on, the distant glow of the cafe's sign barely visible through the sheets of rain, a beacon of safety in the storm. The storm raged on, and the rain seemed to come down harder with every step they took. As Cookie and Biscuit made their way along a narrow street, they passed a small courtyard garden. Its usually serene and colourful blooms now battered by the relentless downpour. Cookie suddenly stopped, her ears twitching as she heard a faint sound carried by the wind, a tiny, desperate cry for help. "Did you hear that?" Cookie called out to Biscuit over the roar of the storm. Biscuit paused, tilting her head to listen. There it was again, a soft, frightened squeak, barely audible over the splattering rain. "Someone's in trouble," Biscuit said, her ears turning towards the source of the sound. Without hesitation, Cookie darted towards the garden, her paws splashing through the shallow puddles as she followed the cries. In the centre of the courtyard, they found Prickle, a young hedgehog clinging precariously to the narrow ledge of a planter box. The rainwater had begun pooling around the planter, forming a swirling moat that threatened to overflow and sweep Prickle away. The hedgehog's tiny frame was trembling, his quills flattened and wet, his eyes wide with fear. "Hold on, Prickle!" Cookie called out, trying to keep her voice steady despite the growing urgency. Prickle looked up, his eyes filled with relief but also sheer terror as he glanced at the churning water below. Biscuit quickly assessed the situation, her sharp ears scanning the garden. The planter was perched awkwardly in the centre, surrounded by water that was rising with each passing second. They needed to get Prickle out, and fast. "We need something to bridge the gap," Biscuit said, her voice calm despite the chaos. "Something sturdy enough for Prickle to crawl across." Cookie's eyes darted around the courtyard until she spotted a narrow plank leaning against the garden wall, partially hidden by overgrown ivy. "There!" she shouted, running towards it. The plank was old, but it seemed strong enough for their purpose. With great effort, Cookie pushed it across the garden, her paws slipping slightly on the slick cobblestones as she manoeuvred the plank into place. "All right, Prickle," Biscuit said, her voice gentle but firm. "You're going to have to crawl across, nice and slow. Don't look down, just keep your eyes on us." Prickle hesitated, his tiny paws gripping the edge of the planter. The swirling water below looked terrifying, and he trembled visibly. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "You can do it, Prickle," Cookie encouraged, her amber eyes locked on his. "We're right here, just one paw at a time." With a deep breath, Prickle slowly began to inch his way onto the plank, his tiny claws scrabbling for purchase. The plank creaked slightly under his weight, and he froze, fear flashing across his face. "Keep going," Biscuit urged, her voice steady. "You're doing great." Prickle swallowed hard and continued, his small body moving slowly but surely across a makeshift bridge. Cookie and Biscuit watched intently, their own paws ready to leap forward if needed. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Prickle reached the other side, collapsing into a relieved heap as soon as he was safely across. "You did it!" Cookie cheered, her tail flicking with excitement. She nudged Prickle gently with her nose, her eyes warm. "See? You're braver than you think." Prickle looked up at them, his eyes shining with gratitude despite the rain still pouring down. "Thank you," he said, his voice trembling. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Biscuit nodded, her expression softening. "We're all in this storm together," she said. "Come on, let's get you somewhere safe." With Prickle now alongside them, the trio continued their journey toward the cafe cellar, each step bringing them closer to safety, their spirits lifted by the small victory they had just achieved. As Cookie, Biscuit and Prickle navigated through the storm-soaked streets of Bucharest, each gust of wind and rush of rain tested their resolve. The city had transformed into a maze of hazards, with every turn and alley presenting new challenges. Their fur was thoroughly soaked, clinging to their bodies as they pressed on, driven by the urgency to find shelter. They were nearing the cafe, the thought of the dry cellar spurring their tired paws forward, when a sudden, sharp squeak cut through the noise of the storm. It was a sound fraught with fear and desperation, piercing enough to stop them in their tracks. "Did you hear that?" Cookie called out, her voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. Biscuit paused, straining her ears. The cry came again, more urgent this time. "It's coming from that alley," she shouted, pinpointing the direction with a quick flick of her whiskers. Without hesitation, they changed course, ploughing through the flooded streets toward the source of the distress. As they approached the alley, the grim scene unfolded before them. Riley, the clever rat known for his usually sprightly antics, was in grave danger. He clung desperately to a piece of debris, the swift-moving water threatening to drag him into the gaping maw of an open sewer grate. The fear in Riley's eyes was palpable, his body trembling as he gripped his makeshift raft with diminishing strength. "Help! Please!" Riley's strained voice cracked through the storm, his plea for rescue adding to the urgency of the moment. Cookie dashed forward, her instincts driving her to act, but she halted abruptly at the alley's edge. The water was too fast, churning with a ferocity that barred them from simply wading in to grab Riley. "We can't reach him, not directly," Biscuit assessed quickly, her voice firm despite the panic that threatened to rise. "The current's too strong." Prickle, though small and frightened himself, stayed close, his eyes wide as he watched the drama unfold. "What do we do?" he squeaked, his voice nearly drowned out by the storm. Biscuit looked between Cookie and the rapidly worsening situation, her mind racing for a solution. "We need to think of something fast. Riley won't last much longer out there." The intensity of the storm, Riley's perilous position, and their own drenched and chilled state brought a sharp clarity to their predicament. They needed a plan, and they needed it now. The cafe cellar was close, yet it might as well have been miles away, given the immediate danger facing Riley. "We'll find a way," Cookie stated, determination setting in her jaw. "We have to." Together, they backed away from the water's edge, seeking a momentary respite under the eaves of a nearby building to strategize a rescue. With the storm raging around them, their friend's life hung in the balance, and every second counted. The wind howled through the narrow alley, the rain relentless as it hammered down, making the water in the alley churn like a wild river. Riley's desperate cries still echoed as he clung precariously to a waterlogged piece of debris. Prickle, Cookie and Biscuit quickly assessed their limited options under the relentless downpour. Suddenly, a light bulb went off in Prickle's head. He'd had an idea, and an idea that might just save Riley. He quickly told Cookie and Biscuit what they needed to do, and they headed back out. "Okay, let's do this," Prickle said, his voice steady despite the visible shivers that ran through his small body. Anchoring himself close to the rushing water, he pressed his spiky body against the slick cobblestones, finding traction where none seemed possible. Cookie and Biscuit grasped Prickle's rear, steadying themselves against his surprisingly firm hold. "Ready, Cookie?" Biscuit shouted over the roar of the storm. Cookie nodded, her face set with determination. "Let's bring him back!" With the chain formed, Cookie began edging closer to the turbulent water, reaching out towards Riley with an outstretched paw. The rat, soaked and shivering, was barely holding on, his own paw weakly outstretched towards Cookie's. "Come on, Riley, just a little further," Cookie called, her voice laced with urgency. The water was rising, and with it, the debris that barely kept Riley afloat bobbed dangerously close to the open sewer grate. Riley's paw flailed, his strength waning, but his fingers finally grazed across Cookie's paw. With a desperate lunge, he managed to hook his tiny paw around hers. Cookie's heart pounded as she felt the firm grip. "I've got you!" she grunted, her muscles straining. The return was perilous. The force of the water fought against them. Every inch they pulled Riley back felt like a mile. Prickle's spikes dug deeper into the cobblestones, his body a bridge between safety and the abyss. Biscuit added her strength to Cookie's, her body leaning back as they both pulled with all their might. The trio's combined efforts gradually overcame the relentless pull of the storm water. Inch by inch, centimetre by centimetre, Riley came closer to safety until, with one final tug, they dragged him out of the water's lethal path. Riley collapsed onto the wet cobblestones beside them, coughing and gasping for air. The reality of his near demise hung heavily in the air, his usual cheeky demeanour washed away by the storm's ferocity. You saved me," he wheezed, looking up at his rescuers with a rare sincerity in his eyes. "I thought I was a goner for sure." Cookie breathed heavily, managing a weak smile. "Not on our watch, Riley. Not on our watch." Prickle, still pressed firmly against the ground, finally allowed himself to relax. His body ached from the strain, but a swell of pride filled his chest. He had been terrified, but he stood firm when it counted. "Let's get out of this rain," Biscuit suggested, her voice soft but filled with the warmth of relief. They all needed to find shelter, to dry off, and to let the day's fears and triumphs settle. Supporting each other, the group made their way toward the cafe. The storm continued to rage around them, but within the small band there was a quiet celebration of life and friendship. The danger had not passed entirely, but for now they were together and they were safe. The streets of Bucharest had transformed into rivers, the gutters overflowing and merging into one continuous deluge that swept through the city. Despite their exhaustion, Cookie, Biscuit, Prickle and Riley knew they were close to their refuge, the cafe cellar that promised warmth and safety. As they trudged forward, the wind whipped around them, howling through the deserted alleys like a banshee. The rain lashed at their faces, making it difficult to see, but the light from the cafe sign flickered in the distance, a lighthouse guiding weary sailors to shore. Riley, usually the comedian of the group, had been quiet since his near miss in the storm. Now, as they neared safety, his spirit seemed to revive slightly. "You know," he said, shaking his wet fur, "I always thought I'd make a splash in this city, but this isn't quite what I had in mind." His attempt at humour brought a weary chuckle from Cookie, who was leading the way. "Just keep swimming, Riley," she quipped back, her tail flicking water in a playful arc. Prickle, who had been mostly silent, seemed to stand a little taller. The weight of the water did nothing to dampen the pride swelling in his chest. He had been crucial in saving Riley, a fact that did not escape him or his companions. "I guess it's true what they say," he mused aloud. "Even the smallest creature can change the course of the future, or at least the course of a stormy afternoon." The warmth of camaraderie bolstered their spirits as they approached the cafe. The entrance was in sight now, just across a flooded courtyard that had once been a cosy spot for afternoon coffee drinkers. Now it was a makeshift pond, rippling and swirling ominously. Cookie paused at the edge, assessing the best path through. "We need to be careful here. Stick together," she instructed, her eyes scanning for the safest route. Biscuit nodded, taking the lead. "Follow me," she said, stepping cautiously into the water. The flood had reached their bellies, chilling them to the bone, but the thought of dry shelter just ahead spurred them on. The water tugged at their legs, but they moved as one, each step deliberate and synchronized. Prickle clung to Biscuit's side, his small body buffeted by the current. Riley swam alongside, his earlier levity replaced by a focused determination. Finally, they reached the cafe's cellar door. Biscuit pushed against it, her body straining as the wind howled in protest. With a creak and a groan, the door swung open, releasing a gust of warm air from inside. They hurried in, one by one, shaking off the rain like dogs after a bath. Inside, the cellar was just as they remembered, dry, warm, and welcoming. Blankets were stacked on crates, and a faint smell of coffee lingered in the air, a reminder of the cafe's purpose in sunnier times. The group collapsed onto the blankets, their breaths coming out in heavy puffs. "We made it," Cookie sighed, her eyes closing in relief. Riley, now safely ensconced in a dry corner, managed a weak smile. "Thanks to you," he said, his voice soft. "I owe you more than I can say." The storm continued to rage outside, but within the walls of the cafe cellar there was a quiet sense of victory. They had faced the storm together and had emerged stronger for it. Inside the dimly lit cafe cellar, the atmosphere was one of serene sanctuary amidst the storm's fury. The space was crammed with crates and boxes, some piled high to form makeshift seating areas. Soft blankets, left by compassionate cafe staff for situations just as this, were spread out, offering cozy relief to the weary adventurers. Cookie settled onto a thick fleece blanket with a sigh of profound relief. She curled her tail around her body, her eyes slowly closing as she listened to the muted sounds of the storm still raging outside. The respite from the relentless wind and rain felt like a balm to her waterlogged fur. Biscuit, ever the vigilant guardian, chose a spot near the entrance, her posture relaxed, but her ears still attuned to any changes in the storm's tempestuous symphony. She reflected on the day's harrowing events, proud of her friend's bravery and her own resourcefulness. Prickle, the small hedgehog, whose courage had been unexpectedly tested, found a quiet corner where he could roll into a cozy ball. Cookie glanced over at him and smiled. "You were really brave today, Prickle," she said warmly. "We couldn't have managed it without you." Prickle blushed under his spines, pleased by the praise but too modest to fully embrace it. "I just did what I had to do," he murmured. "I'm just glad I could help." Riley, who was usually brimming with quips and mischief, had a subdued air about him. The day's fright had dampened his usual spirited demeanour. Sitting up against a crate, he looked around at his friends and cleared his throat. I really owe all of you a lot," he said, his voice uncharacteristically earnest. "You saved me out there. I won't forget that." The simple, heartfelt gratitude from Riley struck a chord with the group. They exchanged looks, their faces reflecting a mix of fatigue and contentment. Cookie reached over and nudged Riley gently. "That's what friends are for," she said. "We look out for each other." As the conversation lulled, Biscuit spoke up, her voice soft but carrying through the cellar. "Today showed us just how strong we can be together. Storms, no matter how fierce, can't break the bond we share." The group nodded, their thoughts turning inward as they each considered the day's trials and triumphs. The storm had indeed been a fierce opponent, but their unity had carried them through safely. Outside, the howl of the wind began to lessen, and the relentless drumming of the rain softened to a gentle patter. The storm was passing, leaving behind a cleansed city and a quiet night. As the cellar grew quieter, each member of the group drifted off to sleep, their bodies aligned in a comfortable huddle. In the stillness of the cellar, with the storm's rage subsiding, they found peace. Cookie, Biscuit, Prickle, and Riley, each lost in dreams, were bound together not just by the adventure they had shared, but by a deep-seated trust and friendship that the storm had only strengthened. As the first faint hints of dawn began to seep through the cracks above, they slept on, secure in the knowledge that together they could weather any storm. The end.